Hello, everyone, and welcome. We'll get started in just a moment, giving everybody a chance to log in, get a cup of coffee, so we can talk pricing. All right, let's get this started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Fowler. I'm a longtime journalist. You may know me from my work as the technology columnist for the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. You can find me on Substack at Jeffrey Fowler. Today, I'm very excited to help lead a conversation about the impact of algorithmic pricing on our lives and our economy, and also some of the best ideas out there about how to protect consumers in this new world. Um, we'd like to invite all of you online to be part of the conversation. So please use the Q&A function in the Zoom to type in your questions for the speakers, and we'll get to as many of them as possible in the last 15 minutes or so of today's conversation. Now, please help me welcome our panel speakers. I'm going to give you a little bit of bio about each of them and we'll dive in. First, we have Doha Meki. Doha is a seasoned antitrust lawyer, former public servant, and ex-Justice Department enforcer. She has spent her career advancing competition and fair dealing in markets. She played a central role in building the DOJ's case against Google, Apple, Ticketmaster Live Nation, RealPage, and Visa. Just a few important cases there. Next, we have Stacy Mitchell. She is a writer, strategist, and policy advocate. Her work focuses on dismantling concentrated corporate power and building thriving communities and a healthy democracy. She is co-executive director of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Um, Next, we have Ted Tatos. He is a quantitative microeconomist specializing in econometric and statistical analysis. His recent research focuses on antitrust inability to police digital markets and algorithmic pricing. And last but not least, we have Katie Wells. She is a geographer and researcher investigating how tech affects the way we live in cities and especially how we work in them. She is a senior fellow at AI Now. All right, we're going to dive in now. First up, I'd like to get us all warmed up with a little experiment. One thing I love to do as a journalist is run little tests with the technologies in our lives to reveal how it actually works. And Katie has a test she'd like to run on me and everybody else watching today that might reveal something about the reality of algorithmic pricing and how it harms us. Now, this is a little risky, but she's going to do it with me live here on Zoom, and you're all welcome to join along too. All right, Katie, what would you like me to do?
Jeff, I want you to take out one or two of your phones
How did
since
you
you're
know
going
I
to.
had several phones?
I had a suspicion. And I'm going to ask you and everyone else watching if you would like. We're going to go shopping for a particular item from Target. I'm going to ask you to go into either the Target browser, Jeff, or the Target app,
Okay,
whichever you choose. And I'm going to have you search for a particular item that I have frustratingly noticed has a different price. I have a kid with allergies, Jeff. And so I love buying this vegan gluten-free banana bread mix because it makes my life easier. So I'm going to ask you to type in Go Nanas chocolate chip banana bread mix.
got
And
it.
I'm going to see if I can beat you. That's my goal.
Okay. Beat me on price or beat me on speed?
No price. I don't think I can beat you on speed. Jeff, what are
All
you
right.
seeing?
This is fascinating. So I see $8.39.
And how are you seeing that? Is that on incognito mode? How are you finding it?
So I am on the Target app on an iPhone.
Okay. I am on the Target browser on an iPhone and I am getting 9.49.
All right. That's a pretty big difference. That's a more than $1 difference.
You are going to buy
Uh,
this for my family, right? When we get off this call.
Definitely, because I'm getting the best deal. But let me see if there's any even better deals out there. Okay, so I'm going to go to a web browser. I'm going to use hidden browsing mode and see if I can find this. Let's see if I just Google it at Target and see what it gives me.
Oh, and we are having some of our allies on this call are getting other prices they're reporting, which I appreciate. Oh, Stacy's getting 839. Okay, Stacy. I also will hit you up to help me buy this item.
Okay, Katie, look at this. On the web, Google tells me that Target will charge me $7.99 for this. So we're
Okay, well, and
now,
I see Angel Han from Consumer Reports in the chat. She is also getting that 7.99, Jeff. You guys are the winners of today.
are we the winners? That's the question. What's happening here, Katie? And what does it tell us about the way that our digital shopping economy works?
Jeff, I only have bad news. After a decade of watching these big tech companies screw worker wages with these machines that pay workers differently, now they have turned to consumers. And so now those of us shopping with our computers or our phones or even our human bodies in stores where they have electronic shelf labels, we're subject to all kinds of pricing experiments. And so the data that sits on our phone or our computer is helping perhaps to inform the price, or these companies are just running an experiment to see if they can get Jeff or Stacy, to buy the same item for as much as they can do.
So you say perhaps. Do we not know? Like, how can we not know how they're setting the price?
I know this is super annoying. So I'm an empiricist by nature, a researcher by trade. I desperately want to know and tell you that I know how it's done. I can tell you there are different prices we can find on the Target app and the Target website, but I can't tell you. And we don't know why exactly on certain days, at certain times, certain people get different prices.
So you recently published some groundbreaking research into how Instagram is setting, not Instagram, Instacart is setting its prices. I'm sure Instagram would like to as well if they could. How Instacart is setting prices. Uh, what did you learn from that? Did you find evidence, for example, that they are using our data against us to charge some people more and some people less?
Well, so I had the fortune to work with some great journalists at Consumer Reports and More Perfect Union, and they dug into the patents around what Instacart has technology to do. And there is a suggestion that some of their technology could be used in a way that would track our individual habits and use that data to inform prices. Our research itself was able to document the existence of all kinds of pricing experiments, but I couldn't really tell you why in some of these tests, why you and I would be getting different prices.
Hmm. So lack of transparency is already a really big theme here.
Huge. It's so frustrating. How can we even
Yeah.
comparison shop?
Yeah. I want to turn now to Stacy. You've done incredible work on Amazon. Can you help us understand in practical terms how it steers the marketplace and ultimately extracts more money from consumers?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much about this that's kind of hard to wrap your mind around. I mean, and Katie was, in the experiment we just ran, we see this like existence of different prices for different people and the possibility that they're gathering data on all of us and using that, to set prices depending on how much they think different people will pay. There are all these other things going on that are don't necessarily involve different prices to different people, but the ability to use algorithms to raise prices across the board. So, we look online, we see like if you're shopping on Amazon, you see all these different sellers and they seem to be, there's this kind of illusion of competition where they seem to be like fighting one another to get the buy box by lowering their price. And, you can click away and see what Walmart has that item at and so on. And so it looks like competition. There's a lot of price variability. But there's some very credible allegations in the monopolization lawsuit that the Federal Trade Commission and 17 states have brought against Amazon, where they're alleging that Amazon actually uses three separate pricing algorithms to compel its competitors online to raise their prices. And so basically is lifting up prices across the web. And this seems like nonsensical. You're like, how is this possible that this is happening? How can you get a competitor to raise their prices? And so I just want to take a minute to unpack it. If you think about, like, just to step back for a minute, if you're out in the real world, if you're, say, in a community where there's a supermarket that's the most popular supermarket and you're another supermarket, like a classic way that you might try to peel off some of that business for yourself is to lower prices. So you'd offer milk or bread at a discount. People would come over to your store to get those lower prices, and they might be like, this is a great store, I'm going to start shopping here. And so you would pick up some of that business. Classic way to compete. Amazon has essentially blocked that from happening online. And the way that it's happened, Amazon's the big gorilla. They're 50% of online shopping. And what happens with its algorithms is it's monitoring the entire web. So it is seeing every price change in real time that every other competitor is making. And what happens is a competitor will, attempt to gain customers by lowering prices. So Walmart might discount something, for example, or Target or Best Buy or an independent retailer. And as soon as they do that, Amazon's algorithm matches them. So price comes down, Amazon matches. Price comes down, instantly matches by Amazon. And what happens, this is called the anti-discounting algorithm. It was invented by an executive within Amazon named Jeff Wilke a number of years back. And according to information filed in this case, he is quoted in internal documents as saying that if we implement this, prices will go up. And this is exactly what happens because the competitor that's trying to win business quickly learns that they're never going to win any business through this strategy because customers look around and they say, Walmart never has a lower price. Target never has a lower price than Amazon. And I'm used to shopping on Amazon. So I'm just going to stay on Amazon. And eventually the competitors' algorithms recognize that. And they're like, we're never gaining any customers. All we're doing is killing our profit margins. So they start to raise their price back up. And then Amazon follows. And maybe they go a little higher and Amazon follows. And the result is we have artificially inflated prices across the web. This is what the FTC has alleged, and there's some economists that have done some work to really back this up, suggesting that this in fact is happening.
So we're all paying more. We're not in a more competitive marketplace, you're saying.
That's exactly right. And you could look like, say, in the real world, if there was real competition, the price of something might be like, say, $10. What this suggests is that its algorithms are able to nudge other algorithms up so that maybe the going price is $12. And it might be that Amazon's pricing it at $11.95 or something. So when you shop around, you think, okay, everybody's basically at 12. Amazon's still the low cost leader, so I'm going to go there. But what we can't see is that Amazon is in fact kind of orchestrating prices everywhere up above what they should be.
Got it. So I want to turn from the consumer experience to the legal issues here with Doha and Ted. And this will help us also ground us in why conversation is really urgent today. So traditional antitrust laws were built to catch humans conspiring in smoke-filled rooms. But today we have algorithmic coordination and shared software. So why is this transition from human to algorithmic pricing breaking our traditional definition of collusion? Either of you is welcome to chime in.
Go ahead, Ted.
Well, so traditionally, uh, antitrust laws have been concerned with explicit coordination. In other words, exactly what you described is conspirators getting together and agreeing to fixed prices. The concern here is that algorithms can achieve the same outcome through what we call tacit collusion. So now conspirators no longer have to meet. The algorithms themselves can achieve the same goal. So we're getting to the same consumer harm. We're just getting through it differently. So that was my concern. That's been my concern with this, that we do have ways of policing anti-competitive conduct, but it doesn't encompass all the ways um, um, that we can get there because algorithms can now essentially outflank um, the traditional antitrust means of disciplining that conduct.
So I think that's exactly right. When I was at DOJ, I spent a lot of my time untangling collusion. The antitrust laws have been on the books for more than a century in this country, and they're actually remarkably simple. We used to say they're like playground rules, right? So you can't gang up on other kids at the playground, and Congress, in its wisdom, sort of understood that when it legislated more than a century ago. So ostensible competitors aren't supposed to gang up in the marketplace either. And that means there's rules against price fixing. But even short of full-blown price fixing, there's actually rules against something called information sharing. And we brought cases against information sharing when I was at DOJ as well. So one of my favorite cases was a case against chicken processors that were actually colluding on the wages and benefits that they were going to offer some of the most vulnerable workers in the Sun Belt that were like working in chicken slaughterhouses. And there were intermediaries, sometimes in rooms that were facilitating these kinds of information exchanges, and we banned them in the industry. And we started to see more examples of this, and it really motivated us to look at the policy that was on the books and go out to the market, go out to the lawyers that were advising companies, and try to clarify the state of the law. And what we saw is a very big gap between the law that was on the books and some of the behavior that we saw in the market. And so we actually withdrew, to our astonishment, safe harbors that were in policy that was, on the books for a long time at the DOJ and the FTC that actually permitted information sharing, that fell along certain guideposts that actually made it okay to aggregate certain kinds of data so long as there was an intermediary. And that just didn't seem right to us because it really had calcified a view of markets that had really evolved and really didn't take into account the way that the digital world had actually made it much easier to collude and the way that algorithms had functioned as the new intermediaries. And so we brought another case involving meat processors called Agristats. It's actually going to trial in May. And we saw the RealPage case that we ultimately filed, off in the distance. Obviously, we didn't know, or we couldn't talk to the public yet because that case had not been filed, but we saw algorithmic collusion in the distance. And I gave a speech in 2023 warning the public about the dangers of algorithmic intermediaries and how they had really solved for a lot of the speed bumps and frictions of the old world and how we shouldn't think about information sharing with the limitations of the physical world. And so really there's a straight line between this really old concept of collusion in the smoke-filled room and information sharing to algorithmic collusion. And I think of surveillance pricing as kind of the King Kong of algorithmic collusion. And so all of these issues are kind of in play together.
You used the term surveillance pricing. Could you help define that for everybody who doesn't know that one?
Yeah, surveillance pricing kind of combines not just the ability of companies to, aggregate data among competitors, but really to aggregate, behavioral data, consumer data that really helps companies understand to a degree that would have been incomprehensible just decades ago about their consumers, right? Their location data, their shopping habits, their credit card purchases, right? The rise of data aggregators and the ability to just buy information about consumers very easily. The porosity of data privacy law has just made it much easier to glean information about people. And so it just becomes much easier to surveil and unfortunately predate on customers, right? And so there's this concept of the consumer that's kind of baked into antitrust law as like anyone with a willingness to pay. But, we've kind of turned that upside down in surveillance pricing world And the sort of worst, most aggressive articulation of surveillance pricing is not someone with like a willingness to pay, but sort of anyone who can be made to pay, right?
Mm, mm. Um, I want to talk about what's missing right now to make the right legal case about anti-competitive behavior. And this is open to everybody on the panel, but perhaps Stacy and Ted might want to weigh in particular. Um, so a big running theme of this conversation today is invisibility. Public institutions and consumers often assume that these markets are producing competitive outcomes because these algorithms are in a black box. Ted, your research specifically looks at some of these evidence gaps. So, what are the evidentiary hurdles that enforcers face today, and how do we bring transparency to these systems?
Yeah, so that's a critical problem here, particularly because I think when regulators and litigators see that certain revenue management firms are using these algorithms, they might feel a little bit daunted by the complexity of these models, right? And by these models, I mean some of the most commonly used ones, like neural networks, right? When you hear the word neural networks, wow, you think, wow, that must be really complex. Like it's really hard to understand. Or things like random forest, right? And the problem with those models is that they are black box models. And what I mean by black box models is that we can't readily determine what factors influence the outcome, right? If we use if we use simpler models, right? Or if we use, let's say, rules-based algorithms, right? If this, then that, then we can figure out where that effect is coming from. Oh, it's coming from, from increased demand, or it's a sale, or and so on. With neural networks and these other more complex algorithms, it's not only hard for the consumer to see why the price is going up. It's often hard for the client as well. So you might ask, well, why did you raise prices there? I don't know. The algorithm said so. Now you go to the algorithmic provider, and the algorithmic provider says, well, I have to look at it because the algorithm doesn't tell me that. And that's where transparency is really important, is it is to make sure that when, let's say, a firm or a seller imposes a price increase, you have a reason for doing so, particularly when that price increase is inconsistent or is incongruous with with the supply and demand factors that we observe. And that's what we saw in the RealPage case.
Stacy, do you want to jump in? Like, what specific evidentiary hurdles do enforcers face now in this world?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Ted's point about how much this stuff is like a black box is really important, and the opacity around it. And, we need to have regulators be able to look under the hood. Like, we need mechanisms for auditing of how these algorithms work. Katie made this comment at the beginning about the Instacart study. It's like, she can't tell us like what is actually going on here and what's the basis of these price differentials. So there's just so much that we don't know and that regulators don't know. And so some of it is we need some transparency and sort of rules that allow regulators to actually take a look at these things and to audit them and to understand how they work. I also think, just picking up on something that Doha touched on earlier in this great speech that you gave back in 2023, is that just that the so often we're bringing and policymakers are bringing these models of how pricing works in the analog and the physical world to these digital settings where the dynamics are not the same at all. And there are often these things that are kind of, the opposite of what you would expect in some sense. And so we really need a big adjustment on how we think about the dynamics of information, the way that different algorithms interact, that they can, Amazon can adjust its prices, not just to change what it's charging consumers, but by adjusting its prices, it can actually induce another algorithm that's reacting to it to adjust its prices. And so they learn the smartest ones, the ones working with the most data, the ones that have the fastest reaction times, everything that a dominant company would have. learns how to use an algorithm to probe and assess the strategies of its competitors and get them to make changes that work to its advantage. Like that's just a really different concept than you see offline. And I think underscoring all of this is that consumers are only just like the public is only sort of catching up to this. And they've maybe heard about it in certain contexts, like the rent context, for example, or differences in like, the digital price tags on grocery shelves that there's been some state legislation to try to outlaw or just. But really shoppers have not really fully caught up that this is not, that what looks like competition online is not at all competition. I'll just say to close, it was kind of amazing. We did this study last year looking at, a lot of school districts and local governments are buying from Amazon now. And we did a bunch of public information requests to get from, over 100 school districts and local governments, like, what did you buy from Amazon during this calendar year? And so we got back all these spreadsheets and discovered these schools are paying like wildly different prices, sometimes on the same day for the same item. And yet we've got like records of school board meetings where people are saying that this kind of price volatility means that they're somehow always getting the lowest price. Like they have the opposite idea of what's happening here than is real. And so there's a degree to which just people, the public, kind of needs to catch up with how different this is and really start pushing policymakers to take action.
I mean, I should also say, when we announced the RealPage case, um, either the Assistant Attorney General or the Attorney General, I think, said at the press conference that the DOJ did a linear code review of the RealPage algorithm and confirmed that the objective function of the algorithm was, in fact, to maximize rental proceeds. And so, I mean, that was an important piece of evidence in the case. I would encourage everyone to read the allegations in the complaint. But there's a little bit of a, what's old is new, element to this. I think some of the problems that have plagued the agencies really come home to roost in the digital era, right? The failure to invest resources in public agencies to perform functions to police a $29 trillion economy are really exacerbated in the digital age, right? The United States is well behind its counterparts in having an insufficient number of technologists, data scientists, computer scientists, and others to do this kind of work. I should also say there are small policy fixes that actually make these kinds of investigations very doable. Um, you know, One thing that occurs to me is that doing investigations that involve figuring out what someone said, in the smoke-filled room, that is very hard work, right? Dealing with human sources, having done that kind of work, that is challenging. When companies use digital tools that have audit trails, on some level, they have to accept that they are using tools that are incriminating. And so that is uncomfortable, right? Like they are creating tools that essentially may tell on them in the future. And so using policies or implementing policies that require audit trails essentially tell the story of what happened and in what order, right? And so there is a version of the world in the future that essentially tells the history of what happened and when, and ostensibly why.
We're about halfway through. Oh, Ted, you want to jump in?
I just want to add something very briefly, just because it relates to something both Stacy and Doha said with regard to how algorithms work with each other, right? And Amazon is a prime example of that. Um, we all know of the Amazon buy box algorithm, and that determines which firm or which seller gets the buy box. And that's essentially the determination of the winner because about 80 to 90% of the sales come from the buy box. But there are all sorts of other algorithms also working in conjunction with a buy box, and those are called repricer algorithms. And there are all sorts of firms here on Amazon that offer this service. And um, like Doha said with regard to RealPage, uh, that they maximize that their objective function is to maximize revenue. These repricer algorithms acknowledge that openly. We look, and this is a direct quote from one of them, we look to raise prices 24/7. Okay. So they tell you in every instance they're looking to raise prices. Well, how can they do that? It's because the buy box algorithm acts as a sort of acts in an orchestrative role, right? Because it rotates who the winner is. So now a seller says, "Well, I know I'm going to get the buy box at some point, so why would I lower price?" Right? And so it's also important to understand, and I know this is a heavy lift for regulators, not just what the algorithms do, right? Because in some cases they might not be complex at all. They may be rules based, right? So it's not just how they work on their own, but how they work in conjunction with other algorithms.
Hmm. Let's talk about solutions and what tools exist to protect consumers. Doha, you've been involved in California's legislative efforts to address some of this, and the DOJ has obviously been working. Can you brief us on those efforts?
Sure. So, California, at the end of last year, passed a very robust state level statute that sort of I knew as AB 325. And it was a essentially wholesale ban on using, you know, um, algorithmic, you know, collusion tools, and it introduced a set of procedural and substantive tools for public and private enforcers. And when the California majority leader first got interested in these issues, I think they were motivated by a lot of concerns over affordability, over the necessities of life, and really got focused on making sure that there were sufficient tools, again, to make sure that they weren't getting kicked out of court over procedural issues like pleading deficiencies that had really gotten baked into the law at the federal level that were being applied in state level decisions, and then substantively um, making sure that it was clear that under the Cartwright Act, which is the foundational California antitrust law, that it was clear that it would be illegal under state law for anyone to essentially use or, coerce anyone to use um, a common pricing algorithm to suggest a price over a common product or service.
This is open to everyone on the panel or anyone. Do our existing legal frameworks, privacy laws, consumer protection laws, are they sufficient or do we need more new laws?
We definitely need more new laws. It's been encouraging to see California taking the lead, and obviously a large state with, an AG's office that has some resources, and really hoping to see. I'm really hoping to see, that the legislation that's passed there makes a difference. And I think also this is a good issue for the kind of, laboratories of experimentation that states can be, trying to get different ways and different approaches on how to get into this problem. At the federal level, it's been dispiriting to see, for example, the Federal Trade Commission under the Biden administration was doing a large study of surveillance pricing and had documented that there were hundreds of different retailers that were using surveillance pricing and had some of these data intermediaries and sort of coordinating firms. And they came out with a preliminary, excuse me, some of their preliminary findings back in January, and there was going to be a public comment period so that they could gather more information from the public. Excuse me, and that was completely dropped in the new administration. And as far as I can tell, there doesn't seem to be anything going on to even research this subject or to look at it.
I mean, I would also note that the agencies have just opened a request for public comment on, what we assume is new guidelines on competitor collaborations, which were precisely the guidelines that included a safe harbor for collusion that permitted precisely the kind of information sharing that may well have proliferated these kinds of algorithms and the information sharing that sort of predated the digital versions of these schemes. And so this is a place where the public has a voice, and the agencies have asked for comment, and certainly well-resourced and well-funded companies are not going to miss a beat. And through trade associations and aligned academics, will certainly submit a lot of position statements about exactly what the policy position of the federal government should be. And to be clear, that statement will be essentially how much companies should be able to collude before the federal government should care. And so people should be interested, and if they have thoughts, they should submit them.
One of the other things, if I could just add a couple of things on the very local front, we've been working after we did this procurement research with Amazon. We've got a kind of cohort of folks who've signed up, just regular folks who've signed up with us to do that information request of their own local governments, and then get involved with us in trying to push for policy change, whether it's you shouldn't be shopping at Amazon to start with, or we've also called for states to step in and ban, or cities themselves can do it, but it would be great at the state level to just ban dynamic pricing in public procurement contracts. Like, it's very simple. You should negotiate a fixed price contract, the traditional procurement approach, and not leave your school district kind of open to this kind of pricing fluctuations and inflated costs. So that's on like a very accessible local level that you can go to your city council and actually take this issue up. And we're really happy at ILSR to help you. The other thing I wanted to just mention briefly is that, as I said, some of the Amazon's pricing algorithms are at play in the antitrust suit that's been brought, that's scheduled to go to trial in about a year. These things take a long time. It's brought by the FTC in 17 states. And one of the things that's really notable, and I'm super curious to see where this goes. I think this case is really important. But Amazon filed motion to dismiss, like basically sort of throw this out. There's not any reasonable grounds for this case. And the judge sided with the FTC and the states, and in particular said that that a dominant company kind of unilaterally using algorithms to monitor and adjust prices, that there's a scenario in which that can violate the Sherman Act. So there, and also the FTC Act, there's an unfair methods of competition thing that's illegal. And so the judge has said that both of those things are at play in this case. And so there is some possibility that this case will take on some of what we're seeing in a positive way. That said, we shouldn't wait for prosecutions when I think there's some gaps in the law that both states and the federal government should be filling.
We're going to get to questions from the audience in just a moment, but before we do, I just want to do like a quick round robin with everybody, and we'll start with you, Katie. My question for each of you is, what do we need next? What is the most important piece of work?
We need these conversations, Jeff.
Yeah, what's the burning research question? What's the data we need to demand? What's the new legal frontier we haven't explored?
Yes, many things. I think it's what you are doing here today. I think the question is how quickly can we train each other to document these abuses, to join Stacy in doing public record requests on what our, local schools are paying for Amazon Bic pens. I think we need to join Consumer Reports Surveillance Pricing Coalition to find out, did Instacart really end its pricing games as it said it did in a public apology in December? I don't know. I think this is a weird moment in which we have to follow labor's lead, that if workers have come together and shown us how they can bargain for better conditions, so too do we as consumers have to sort of put on our researcher hat and come together and get together with your friends and see what they're paying for their banana bread mix. But I think most importantly, while we engage in this research and we document these abuses for these cases, what I really hope folks remember is that we don't want to miss the forest for the trees. These apps and their pricing games, are a symptom of the corporate takeover of retail infrastructure in our marketplaces. And that if we don't, sort of address that corporate concentration with the what the ILSR does so well, like we're going to sort of just end up in a whack-a-mole game. And so I think, Jeff, like we have to face the real issue, which is like, how do we rebuild and strengthen our retail infrastructure so that Silicon Valley's algorithms are no longer, part of the picture?
Got it. Ted, what do we need next? Lightning round, because we've got a lot of good questions.
Yeah. Look, I think the number one thing, well, maybe not the number one thing, but among the top of the list is uh, greater transparency. And I mean greater transparency both for consumers, right? Because right now there's so much uh, uncertainty of whether, like Katie said, or and everyone here said, you don't know if you're getting a good deal, right? And that's what these algorithms really tend to do is exploit tendencies in human behavior. And we've known about these tendencies for a long time. And the way to combat them is information, right? So you look at price histories, right? You check if you buy something on Amazon, right? Look at the price history. Look at camel, camel, camel. Are you really getting a good deal, right? Just because it's Prime Day doesn't mean you're getting a good deal at all, right? So pay attention to how the list price is, because there's something called price increase, list price synchronization. You increase the list price, and then you say, oh, there's a rebate, but you're not really getting a rebate because the price is higher, right? Because you raised the list price, things like that. And for regulators and litigators, increase their familiarity with the algorithms used, right? Don't be daunted by the complexity at all.
Got it. Doha?
So I'm actually very encouraged, and the experience of providing technical assistance in California made me more encouraged because when people find out about this stuff, they get really, really upset and they demand action from their representatives. People do have power; they are not powerless. And so, when these cases move forward and companies are found guilty of price fixing, because there are versions of this conduct that rise to the level of price fixing, we should remember that there are suspension and debarment rules. Doing business with local, state, and federal government is a privilege. And typically, when you violate the antitrust laws, that is a felony. You're not doing business with local, state, and federal government anymore. And so there should be stronger rules or actual efforts to enforce rules that remove companies from the list of companies that are privileged to do business with local, state, and federal governments. And so as these cases move through, people should be making sure that your local school systems, your counties, your states, and also at the federal level, right? Reforms to the FAR and the DFAR. You're price fixing through algorithms. You're not going to be spending taxpayer money anymore. I think that's a huge opportunity.
I love that. Go to the school board, say no more monopoly purchasing for school supplies.
A
Stacy, you
public
can,
corruption issue. That's
yeah.
great.
Stacy, you can bring us home. What do we need next?
I just want to plus one everything that was already said. That really covered everything, and we've got some great questions from the audience, so I'm good to go.
Okay. First question from the audience, and remember, y'all can type them into the chat, and we'll get to them hopefully. We'll start with you, Katie. The question is: I see companies justifying surveillance pricing on the basis of offering targeted
Yeah.
discounts that are good for at least some consumers. What is wrong or misleading about this argument? I'm going to interject here just to share one of my favorite little experiments on this very topic that I wrote about in the Washington Post last year. I went through the data of my Starbucks app. Anybody use Starbucks, the Starbucks app, and it's constantly giving you those little promotions, and it says like, hey, if you come in today, you get, a free whatever, or it's $50, 50 cents off. Well, when I looked at the data and the history, I found that the more I went to Starbucks, the fewer discounts I got, meaning it was not a loyalty app. It was the inverse of a loyalty app. The more that I went there, the more they were actually charging me, the more I actually paid at the end of the day. So that was my experience with my Starbucks app. Katie, how do you think about this? It's a discount kind of argument.
Okay, I love that research. And I think Stephanie Wynn was part of that project on the loyalty trap, which was excellent. I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah, I like a coupon. I want a discount, but it needs to be public. It needs to be accessible to everybody. I was recently at the Safeway here in DC, standing next to an older woman, and we were looking at paper plate prices, but we weren't looking on the shelf labels. We were both looking through our phone for the Safeway coupon app, trying to figure out like what was a better one, and she was getting a better coupon than I was. We are being split as consumers, and I think that Consumer Reports research. Jeff, did you see that last year about Kroger's?
Mhm.
That was starting to break apart the argument that Kroger's is giving you better coupons, when they surveil you, because they were giving folks that had lower perceived incomes worse coupons, right?
That was what well part that was part of the concern. I think the concern was also that they had bad data about people, and so they were
Okay.
making bad inferences. So it was
But
layers
even
upon
if
layers
they
of problems.
But even if they had good data, right, they're going to end up doing what CC finds with Amazon, right? Like they're just going to raise the prices. So I do want a coupon, and there's nothing wrong with it, but we all need to be getting the happy hour deal.
Yeah. Anybody else want to jump in on what's wrong with discounts?
Well, the issue with the discounts is these loyalty apps. These are ways of getting at your price elasticity. You know how price elastic you are, right? And there are ways of getting you. So loyalty is a way of determining how locked in you are to a particular seller. Like we see loyalty discounts, right? Or loyalty cards with airlines, right? That's a way of signaling to the airline that you're probably not going to go comparison shop somewhere else because you've got our card and you've been using our airline, so it's easier for us to raise your specific price. So be careful when you
Yeah.
use coupons. It's not just because you're getting a coupon, a 20% off coupon off of a higher price is not a discount.
And to bring it full circle, Ted, right? The when we did the practice round yesterday for Target, when I was logged into my Target Circle app, I had the worst price.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Being logged on, that allows us. That's why firms want you to use their app because they gather more information on you. And that information is used to determine your price elasticity. How much can we raise your price?
All right,
We
another
saw this
question from
in,
oh,
oh,
go ahead, Stacey.
we saw this when we were gathering data from the school districts that, we would see examples. Like there was an example of the Denver Public Schools bought a stapler, a single stapler from Amazon for $16. And a few days later bought the same stapler for $62. Because like if you log on, you're like, oh, I need to buy the same thing again. They're sort of serving it up to you like, hey, do you need another one of these? And you're not paying attention, and it's sort of like how they get you into this system of not registering what's going on. There is some interesting legislation in Rhode Island, particularly around grocery prices, where, any kind of discount would have to be offered broadly. So it would be printed in flyers. Everyone would have access to it. So you couldn't get away with this thing of like, oh, I'm sending someone a discount on the app, a discount on the app. that I'm not sending to someone else or I'm varying them. It's like, yeah, you can offer discounts to everybody, and you have to communicate that to everyone. And I hope to see that legislation pass.
Got it. Here's another question. We're going to start with Doha on this one. How would you approach writing a law or regulation that prohibited surveillance pricing but didn't sweep in traditional discounts that do depend on personal information, such as discounts for seniors, students, etc.?
So I think those are the kinds of like discounts that people love. It's like the old like paper coupons, right? Like people like the digital discounts for the sake of convenience. I think what they don't consent to is like the broad-based surveillance and sweeping in of all of the other aspects of your life. And so um, I think most people will tell you they are warm to that kind of like first line, like price discrimination, like targeting, like on those factors. Um, but I think what it points to is, again, this is the what's old is new problem, right? Failures along privacy law issues, failures along these like old consumer law, fair dealing, antitrust problems that are now just laid bare in the surveillance pricing era. And so one option is to go back and deal with those. Another is to do wholesale bans on the kind of roving surveillance economy. One thing I will recommend is an upcoming surveillance pricing symposium that the California Law Review is doing on April 24th. And we will have experts who are thinking about these issues from consumer, labor, antitrust, and computer science world, who will be thinking about exactly these kinds of questions. So I am confident that with the smartest people in the room, there will be good thinking along these lines.
Yeah, another question. Ted, maybe we'll start with you on this one. Now that some states have passed surveillance pricing transparency laws, such as New York, are you aware of any systemic research or systematic research that is taking advantage by doing systematic study along the lines of the Target experiment we did at the beginning of this call? Is anybody even just figuring out using that New York law, like who's doing price discrimination? Who's doing this kind of stuff?
So there are two th yeah, so there are two things. So price discrimination is ubiquitous, right? Almost every platform does it, right? We encounter price discrimination algorithms that use price discrimination across the entire industry, right? Whether you're renting uh, a um, a room at a hotel, whether you're using Airbnb, whether you're getting uh, whether you're buying an airline ticket, whether you're buying uh, um, anything on Amazon, right? Um, Now, whether there are systematic studies or research studies, that's very difficult because these studies require data from the platforms themselves, right? So there's sort of a moat there. There have been studies. There's a study back in 2016 by uh, Chen, Mislove, and Wilson, I believe. And the way that they obtained Amazon data, and they obtained Amazon data with an eye towards looking at, how pervasive is algorithmic pricing, and they obtained that data by scraping. So right now, there it's the problem here is that um, you're you're less likely to obtain these data in research, and to be perfectly blunt, you're more likely to obtain these data in research if you're doing a white paper for one of these firms. Okay, so uh, so that's the I think the problem with regard
Yeah.
to that.
I will say if anybody who's attending today is involved in any of this kind of research or working on, efforts to do more experiments like Katie, please be in touch because that's the kind of stuff that journalists are curious about and want to do ourselves as well. Question, I'm going to start with Stacy on this one. You mentioned the FTC had started some work on and then sort of dropped it. Have efforts to regulate abuses of algorithms lost steam with the current administration? Is there a sort of political reality here that this stuff isn't going to change much in the next couple of years?
Well, at the federal level, I think what we're seeing is pretty discouraging. I mean, seems to be a lot of like sort of soft corruption or worse in terms of people being able to persuade the antitrust agencies to lay off of tactics used by big corporations. And as you said, the FTC appears to have abandoned this after they certainly rolled back the public comment period. We're seeing other activity at the DOJ that seems discouraging on this front. That said, and I don't know if this quite rises to like a silver lining, but it's been amazing to watch over the last year the way states and attorneys general have really stepped up. I mean, I think there was a sense that we were, after decades of antitrust being sort of dormant in many respects, we were starting to make some real progress under the Biden administration. And I think a lot of people in this country, workers, small businesses, consumers, individuals, and policymakers want that. And we've seen states, all of the legislation that's been mentioned, the strides that California has been making, this interesting bill in Rhode Island, and there's more out there that's happening. And we've seen AGs really step up. And so in some ways that's encouraging because historically the states have always been important leaders on antitrust and they were kind of a little bit more in the background. And it's great to see them step up. I will just also briefly say, like, I think what's going to drive this, especially at the state level, is like hearing from people, including small business owners. We noticed in the registration list that we've got, quite a lot of small business owners that are on this call. This doesn't just affect consumers, like it affects the ability of people to compete. Like if you're not out there using surveillance pricing and colluding, you're at a disadvantage effectively. And we need a fair marketplace so people who are abiding by the rules and trying to do right by their customers are the businesses that win. And so it's really important for small businesses to get involved in this issue.
Got it. We only have 2 minutes left, but we got one more question that I think, Katie, you're going to love, and it's up your alley. Wondering if anybody can speak to how these same algorithms and surveillance pricing impacts the people who work for these corporations, i.e. the workers. Can anyone speak briefly to surveillance wage setting and its impacts?
Yes, I can. And you should contact me and we should have a longer conversation. But right now, I can just say that the algorithmic wage discrimination that has beset Uber drivers are turning us all into Uber drivers. There's a scholar named Vina Dubal who recently, said, like, we are all becoming Uber drivers. And I can assure you that what's happening to Instacart workers who, are still fighting to get minimum wage in New York City because Instacart sued the city saying we don't want them to get minimum wage, right? These workers, their interests are the same as our interests as consumers. And I think we have to see ourselves as all in a fight against big tech and the future it has on offer.
Just have to add, there are fascinating cases being filed by Towards Justice and some of the class action firms about essentially hireability and suitability profiles of applicants that start to look a lot like credit reports. And they're being challenged under the Fair Credit Reporting Act that are moving through the courts right now. And they're very, very interesting. And again, sort of using profiles of publicly available data, very intimate data, information that is being purchased from data aggregators. And again, they're looking into the legislative history of the statute and seeing that Congress very much intended that the statute was not just for credit decisions, but also, intended to protect people from, insurance decisions and employment decisions as well. So look out for legal developments there as well.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to have to bring us to a close. Thank everybody for this amazing discussion, your work on these issues. There's a link in the chat to sign up for the newsletter. If you've got stories that you think need to be told about the impact of algorithms on your life or consumers' lives, you can find me at Jeffrey Fowler on Substack and all the other social platforms. And we really appreciate you coming today. Thank you all.
Thank you.
You.